Are we okay? Can we all see now? I can see there are several screens. Are we all okay? Good. Good morning once again. My name's Robert Sawa. I'm an attorney at law and a partner in Kalenge, Bwanika Sawa and Company Advocates. As the moderator has informed you, there are quite a number of laws to go through, so we will have to move pretty fast. The project for review of land administration was part of the land component. That land component had three sub-components, one of which was strengthening the capacity of the land sector. And it is within that third component that the review of the legal framework was done to tackle the legal and institutional issues associated with land administration by developing an appropriate legislative framework. In a way, it was a convergence of policies because that land component in the PSCP2 was itself built on a number of government policies like the medium-term competitiveness strategy, and which eventually transformed into the competitiveness and investment climate strategy. There were also other national policy goals like the Poverty Eradication Plan, Action Plan, which was itself succeeded by the NDP, the National Development Plan, and which is now at the stage of NDP2, taking us up to the year 2020. In between comes the Constitution of Uganda of 1995 and the Land Act of 1998, which also ushered in revolutionary changes in the ownership of land in Uganda. Previous to that, our land law was a collection of foreign doctrines and policies and laws. The basic land and property law came from England, while the land registration law was imported from Australia. We mixed that with a bit of feudal law in this country and customary law, so it was a hodgepodge of things. But with the coming in force of the new constitution, there was an onus placed on the ministry responsible for lands to conduct a comprehensive review of all land-based laws with a view to harmonizing archaic laws and in some cases consolidating laws pertaining to land administration. For quite a number of years, there was also a body of jurisprudence coming from the courts, and that also needed to be reflected in the laws. One of the most critical pieces in these policies and instruments was the Land Sector Strategic Plan, which I will call the LSSP1, because we are now on the LSSP2. The ministry developed the LSSP and government approved it, and it's within this that the operational, institutional and financial framework for all these land sector reforms which you see bearing fruit today have been done. And it was within that framework that the new paradigm brought in by the Constitution, by the Land Act of 1998, and by the National Land Policy were to be actualized. Some of the highlights for purposes of the law review included, as we have said, updating land sector legislation to bring it into line with the new Constitution and the Land Act of 98, removing or overhauling superfluous or obscure land registration procedures, and removing bottlenecks in using land as security, creating a land information system, and facilitating and promoting the decentralization of delivery of land services. I'll go back to a bit of economics, although I'm very poor at the subject. You all are aware of the doing business ranking, and you are also aware of competitiveness. Now, if my sister Naomi wanted to clear a consignment of goods and didn't have enough money and needed to get a quick loan from the bank, there was a time when you needed more than 100 days to do a land transaction in the land office. And I'm sure Professor Musingus will show you some pictures. The records were in tatters. Some could not be found. All the genuine ones couldn't be found. So it was critical to improve things, because availability of land services improves access to credit and improves doing business. And that's why this is part of a private sector competitiveness project. The problems in the land sector were hampering the competitiveness of Uganda as a country. It's difficult to go on without acknowledging the team. And the members of the team are over there on the board. They include yours faithfully, Emeritus Professor Peter Bart from the University of Sydney, one of the foremost land law and land registration experts in the world. Emeritus Professor John Mogambwa, a son of Uganda and formerly of Murdoch University. Professor Moses Musinguzi, whom you'll see very soon. Mr. Peter Warubiri, I don't know if he's in here today. I always call him my teacher. Princess Beatrice Namika, I don't know if she's here. But this is only on the side of the consultancy team, because we're assisted so much by a law review working group from the Ministry of Lands and from the Ministry of Justice and from the Uganda Law Reform Commission. Some of the members of that law review working group include Naomi. They include Sarah Kulata, who is sitting somewhere. They include Mr. Robert Opio, and so many others, for whom we shall always be grateful. I hope the presenter won't come tumbling down next. Good, the scope of the project. The moderator talked of 16 laws. That was a typo. Originally, it was actually 13 laws made up of two parts. One was existing laws, the Town and Country Planning Act, the Land Acquisition Act, the Registration of Titles Act, the Survey Act, the Mortgage Act, the Traditional Rulers Restitution of Assets and Properties Act, the Condominium Property Law, the Local Government Rating Act, and the Surveyors Registration Act. But the project also required us to draft 4 new laws in the areas of regulation of transactions on government land, what we call the Government Land Act, a law to regulate the services and activities of estate agents, a law to regulate and underpin the land information system, and a law for archiving and destruction of land records. But as the consultancy progressed, the ministry in charge of lands, in association with the Law Reform Commission, completed mortgage and physical planning bills, which are already in the pipeline, which culminated in the passing of the Mortgage Act, number 8 of 2009, and the Physical Planning Act, number 8 of 2010. So these were removed from the assignment. I'll try to take you quickly through each of the laws. First, the existing laws. And the first of these on these slides is the Land Acquisition Act. The current law, because it's not yet been amended, was enacted in 1965. It's Chapter 226 of the laws of Uganda. Now, the land component of the PSCP2 required us to harmonize the Land Acquisition Act with the Constitution, to provide for prompt payment of adequate compensation, to recognize the rights of holders of certificates of customary ownership and occupancy to compensation. It was noted at the time that some aspects of the Land Acquisition Act were outdated and unconstitutional, especially in light of Article 26 of the Constitution and Article 237(2)(a), which outline the purposes for which land can be acquired compulsorily and also require prompt payment of fair and adequate compensation prior to acquisition. We also noted that while in the new Constitution, Article 237(2)(a), a local government can compulsorily acquire land, the current Act does not contain a procedure on how a local government can go about that. Then the Constitution required, the new Constitution requires that the people whose land is compulsorily acquired should have access to the courts of law, but the Land Acquisition Act, for the most part, provides for the Attorney General and not the affected individuals to refer disputes to court. So our consultancy came up with a bill which seeks to repeal and replace the Land Acquisition Act to make the law to accord with the Constitution. I will not elaborate more of this. In between, parts of the existing Land Acquisition Act were struck out by the Constitutional Court in the famous case of Advocates for Natural Resources against Attorney General, and that was upheld by the Supreme Court in the case of almost similar names, because it was felt, for example, that Section 7(1) of the Act was inconsistent because it failed to provide for prior payment of compensation in cases of compulsory acquisition. I need to note here that at the time we did this review, we were concerned about acquisition of land for investment, but the climate was not good. I think a systematic demarcation team which had gone to eastern Uganda had been mobbed, so it wasn't felt that the climate was good to bring in this proposal. But we now know that the ministry has started an initiative to cater for that. And I think it's on the floor of Parliament. Next, I will go to the Registration of Titles Act, and I'll spend a bit of time on this because I think it's Sarah who said that whatever is done in land administration invariably culminates in registration of something, registration of a title, a mortgage, registration of a caveat, a registration of a lease. So it's probably the most important statute in the process of land administration. The current Registration of Titles Act has been in force since 1924. It's based on a 1915 statute imported almost verbatim from the Australian state of Victoria. It is a Torrens statute. My brother Robert Opio has written a book about this statute. I would encourage all of you to read it. I've sent for my one. I will show it to you if it arrives before I close this presentation. But I encourage all of you to read it. It's a wonderful, wonderful piece of work. In the LSSP 1, the legal reform required us to provide for decentralization of the National Land Register, to define the role of the center in view of the concept of state guarantee of title. I'll talk about it below. And to provide for keeping, maintenance, and networking of the land register using computers, and admissibility of evidence from computerized records and devices. We're also required to come up with measures to minimize fraud and malpractice. At the time that this law, I'll call it the RTA, Registration of Titles Act. At the time the RTA was enacted in 1924, land registers were kept entirely in manual form. But systems have now computerized, and Uganda has invested heavily in a computerized land information system. So the RTA needed and it needs amendment to support the conversion to computerization. We also need to look forward to electronic lodgement. When computerization occurs, it should eventually become possible to lodge documents electronically. And when that stage is reached, it should become possible to make online title searches. So you go to a bank, you want a loan. If the manager quickly wants to give you a term sheet, he need not send somebody to Wachiso Land Registry or to KCC Land Registry, but can be able to access the land register online and see that the security you proposed to offer to secure the loan actually exists and maybe is not yet encumbered by any other interested party and that kind of thing. Again, with computerization, it may also be possible to introduce paperless conveyancing transactions or where all deals and payments take place electronically. This is where some of the leading torrents jurisdictions like Australia and New Zealand have reached. Some of the torrents jurisdictions in Canada, you know Canada is in provinces. A good number of them are torrents, but not all of them. Some of them have also reached that stage. There is one center where you go, finish the deal, make payment electronically, pay taxes electronically, and effect the transfer electronically. So we drafted the RTA Bill 2013 to repeal and replace the current RTA, but we retained the tenets of the Torrens background of the existing RTA. And you will note that Part 2, I'll show you where to find these laws. You will note that Part 2, which is concerned with administration, in our draft bill, permits the commissioner to decentralize the register as required by the terms of reference. But the team decided against the decentralization of management of the compensation fund, considering that the interests of consistency, transparency, and fairness required it to be centrally administered. There are some lingering issues. Uganda has created a platform of cyber laws, which include the Electronic Transactions Act, the Electronic Signatures Act, and the increasingly famous Computer Misuse Act. My brother Robert Kirunda is an expert in this area. He teaches me this area. Now, one of the difficulties we have is that the Electronic Transactions Act, I think in Section 3, together with Schedule 2, excludes land transactions. So there is a problem with a platform for electronic land transactions or electronic land registration. That's a matter that needs to be looked into. Remember, we are looking at lingering issues. There is also a need to ensure that land transactions are only transacted via the electronic register and electronic process. I recall that in our consultation paper on the land information system, we recommended that before the electronic land information system matures, the registry and the ministry should maintain parallel manual, paper, and electronic records. And during that transition time, the paper or manual records would be the first, let's say, original record, the main record. In retrospect, we now feel, if we get the opportunity, that land transactions should only be transacted via the electronic process, because that comes with an electronic queue, which means that transactions are processed in the order in which they are received on a first come, first served basis, which checks corruption, favoritism, and other malpractices. This electronic queue has succeeded so well in a project called Bhumi in Karnataka in India. And I am informed by the land information system contractor that the system has a functionality for checking where documents or transactions are stuck or where they have delayed, such that if me, a registrar or other officer in the registry, delays things I'm not interested in to work on things I'm interested in, then the system will report me. So I think that is a very critical point. Then another problem is the current Registration of Titles Act envisages only manual or wet ink signatures and a physical embossed seal. It does not, we've already talked about the problem with the cyber laws, but even the law on land registration currently does not recognize or endorse an electronic seal or electronic signature, assuming even an electronic seal would be necessary. That I would leave to the people of technology. So that's another problem, because it interrupts electronic workflow and reduces speed. I understand, Mr. Pio will correct me on this, that things are done through the electronic process, then they are brought out for signing and sealing. So that needs to be addressed as well. I would go on the Registration of Titles Act. I think the draft act we have is more than 100 pages. And I think even the existing one is that big. And there are so many issues, but the time is very limited. I'll next take you to the Survey Act. This is the act under which your land is surveyed, and you know that map in your land title? It's through this act that map, the deed plan, is produced, and other maps for which there are experts here. Now, the existing act commenced on 31st May 1939 and has not been amended since. That existing act still assumes that surveys are conducted by government surveyors using observation and computation techniques that were available in 1939. However, these techniques of surveying have now been replaced by faster, more efficient, and more accurate techniques. Yet the current law does not support use of modern survey and mapping techniques. It doesn't support use of ICT. So while cadastral surveys employ scientific methods and instruments, they need to be based upon the authority of a law. Secondly, the Survey Act needed to be harmonized with the Constitution, the Land Act, and with the proposed Registration of Titles Act, and with current sector government policies such as the LSSP and the Land Information System. We also thought that the law should encourage innovative, modern technologies and approaches for the capture, processing, and dissemination of survey data, spatial data. The consultancy studied these matters in depth and came up with recommendations in an issues paper, which I'll show to you how to access. And we drafted a survey bill 2013, which, in among many things, seeks to repeal and replace the existing act to make it in accord with the Constitution, and to reform the law to take into account the innovative techniques and technology that has come up in survey. Time out. I'll take you quickly through the remaining slides. We looked at the Traditional Rulers Restitution of Assets and Properties Act, and the purpose was to clarify the rights of occupants on land held by traditional rulers. Our findings were that I think the moderator has blocked my computer as well.
May I
oh
request?
yeah, we are back. So after a detailed study, we decided that the issues of the relationship between tenants and occupancy, which arise from the changes brought in by the Constitution, by the Land Act, and by the National Land Policy, were national issues, not unique to only land of traditional rulers, and they required a national solution, not a solution for only land held by traditional rulers. This is Mr. Pio's book, which I talked about, the Torrens Register book, published by Lambert Academic Publishing. It's a wonderful book. Have a look. We looked at the Condominium Property Act, although it is a recent statute of 2001. We still found there were issues relating funds for administration expenses, rules of the condominium corporation, and resolution of disputes. We came up with recommendations, and we drafted an amendment. It's part of those I'll show you. We looked at Local Government Rating Act, which is the law by which local governments collect property taxes. And we found a few inconsistencies, particularly with the Local Governments Act. Look, there is a Local Governments Act and a Local Governments Rating Act. There were some inconsistencies there, and there were some issues of accountability. If I live on this road, I think it's Wampeo Avenue, and I pay rates, yet I don't have street lights. I pay for private collection of garbage. So what are the rates doing? Things like that. They are in the issues paper and in the draft law. We looked at the Land Surveyors Registration Act, currently Chapter 275, and it lumps together land surveyors with quantity surveyors, building surveyors, mining surveyors, hydrological surveyors, valuation surveyors, and all other people. And we felt this was too broad. So we took land surveyors out of the existing Surveyors Registration Act, and we drafted for them a Land Surveyors Registration Bill, which is comprehensive. And we did a small amendment to the current act, simply to bring out land surveyors. We left the rest in the Surveyors Registration Act. Trying to be quick, So we go to the new laws. As we spoke, these were in the areas of governing transactions on government land, a law to underpin the land information system, a law for regulation of estate agents and their transactions, and a law to govern land records archiving and destruction. After, again, a thorough review, we came up with a very comprehensive consultation paper and a draft Government Lands Act, or Government Lands Bill. And again, I'll show you where to find it. On the Land Information System law, I would have wanted to say a lot more. Indeed, I have a lot, because this is one of the critical pieces of legislation. But again, we looked at the policies. There were about 20 studies. In fact, by the time the World Bank and government came in to say enough is enough, we had started getting studies upon the previous studies. But as you well know, the land information system is under implementation, first as a pilot and now as a national rollout. The statistics will be given to you. It's very successful. I can see that between February 2013 and June 2016, it has brought in a hefty sum of $88 million and already repaid what it cost. But the law has not been passed. Something needs to be done about that. We came up with a law for regulation of estate agents and transactions. I think all of us will remember. What was his name? That gentleman who was Kayungirizi? What was the name? Oh, okay, that name. And I remember by the time we did this review, he had 140 cases in the Uganda High Court against him for taking people's money and delivering air. So this is a very, very critical law. The Kayungirizi are very, very active, and they'll confuse and confound you. Yet, for many of us, buying a home or selling land is one of the most important things you do, either most important investment or divestment. So we came up with a bill. Again, I'll show you where to find it. And there is a very comprehensive consultation paper. Now, we're also required to consider a law to govern land records archiving and destruction. We noted the ministry had already hired a land records consultant. We worked closely with him, and that the ministry had already constructed a land records center and archive in Entebbe next to the survey and mapping department. After wide consultation, we saw no need for a land records archiving and destruction law because there is already a National Records and Archives Act. By the time we did this consultancy, the National Records and Archives Act had not been operationalized, and its premises, which are now being used by the Commission of Inquiry on Land, the Bamgemereire Commission, was just an empty site. But the premises have been built. I'm not sure if the act has been operationalized. And in our issues paper, consultation paper and report, we suggested how that law can solve the problems of land records archiving and destruction. In retrospect, because we are now advising that the land registration process be fully the land registration process in Uganda be only done through the electronic means, we may have to revisit that recommendation. Because if we are going to archive all these land records, we may need to revise that recommendation. Way forward, the current CEDP project under which the rollout of the land information is being done states that these bills, the ones I'm going to show you, the ones we've talked about, are being finalized and processed for adoption and that their implementation will be supported under the CEDP project. I will take you to where you can find the laws, and so the web address is at the top, kbsadvocates.com/land reform. I hope you can all see it. Now, if you scroll down to the bottom, you'll see something saying continue reading. I was just about to accuse the moderator of blocking my computer. So when you open that, continue reading, on one side you'll have the issues papers, on the other side you have the draft bills. I think one or two is missing from there, but on the website you'll find an email. And if you want to raise any questions regarding the contents or anything in there, you are free to do so by email. If you click on any, for example, I'll click on the issues paper for estate agency, it will come up. It's some 98 pages. Enjoy yourself. If you want to look at the draft bills, the draft bill for example, for registration of titles is there. You can open it, look at it. One thing I forgot to say, the draft registration of titles bill is drafted in what we call plain language. It's not in the style of the current Registration of Titles Act, which is a very, very complex statute, and for which certain bad words have been said about its suitability for an African country. We shall talk about those on another day. So this one is in very plain language. At least somebody who has gone to O level should be able to understand it. Plain language is one of the attributes, one of the achievements or competencies of Professor Bart. Thank you so much for listening to me. I wish we had more time to engage in this. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sawa. I can only imagine how difficult it is to summarize years of work. This is content that at the School of Law at Makerere we teach for over a year. So to summarize it to a short presentation with a moderator like me who is hovering like a mosquito in the night is not a very easy task. But let's just give another round of applause to appreciate him. Next, may I invite Ms. Naomi Kabanda to speak to us about implementing the national land policy. You're very welcome. Let's welcome her. You know, in Uganda we are quite warm, so I'm surprised that it must be the weather. I think people are a bit chilly this morning. But we are at a hotel, so I'm sure our wonderful conference team is going to see to the amounts of coffee that we are going to get at the next coffee break, because I think we might need a little more.
Who is the operator of this machine? As he settles in technology, good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My presentation is on the National Land Policy. When you look at our theme, it is talking about Land Act 20 years. What have we achieved? What are the key landmarks? And therefore my paper tries to run through what we have done. And this is under the implementation of Uganda's National Land Policy. I want to thank the previous presenter because he's dealt in great length about the legal framework, and so that has saved me some bother because he's told you where we are in the process of legal reforms, and yet legal reforms has been one of our key challenges in implementing Uganda's National Land Policy. I'll give you a quick update. Then our success factors, challenges faced during implementation of the National Land Policy, lessons learned, and a few concluding remarks. I think all of you in this room were part of the inaugural process when the President, Cabinet, we were here for 3 days, and government approved the National Land Policy. And it is the framework we are following which articulates now land in national development, land ownership, distribution, utilization, management, and control. So this is the framework we are following. If you have not seen the book, I have pocket version, but I guess all of you by now, you must have read what is in this very great document. This policy is being implemented in a phased manner, and we have highlighted key priority areas. We have sequenced the implementation, and we had to start with some activities to kickstart off the process of implementation. How far have we gone? We shall go through that. What have been our success factors, challenges during implementation, and some highlights of where we are going. Like I have said, we had what you call priority areas. These are 1 to 3 year strategies, and these ones were grouped according to the strategies in the National Land Policy. We had what you call administrative reforms. These are reforms which required setting up the secretariat, staffing the secretariat, and having to do a bit of capacity building for not only the secretariat but all implementers. And so we highlighted administrative reforms as the basis on which the rest of the reforms would be anchored. And so we prioritized capacity building and training for government, private sector, civil society, and other key actors. Many of you have been in a number of workshops where we have disseminated the policy, and we have talked about the content, we have talked about the strategies, we have talked about the action plan which implements Uganda's National Land Policy. And we have been able to achieve a lot of things, as I shall show you later on in my presentation. So the third component we prioritized was promotion and protection of women's sexual rights to land and access to land. As you are aware, women are the majority users, and therefore we had to prioritize this. and in accordance with Uganda's development agenda, NDP2 and NDP3 in the making, all specify the role of women in development, and the land as a major resource is critical to influencing decision making. Land disputes and land conflict resolution were also prioritized. You are aware that we are having challenges around this area, but we have done some work, and I shall tell you how far we have gone into dispute resolution and conflict resolution. We also prioritized institutional reforms, and these are reforms which were required for delivery of land services. Here we are talking about majorly the establishment of the decentralized ministry zonal offices and accessing these services by the unordinary person. We have done reforms in that area. Then regularization and securing of land rights across the 4 tenures. A lot of work is going on in this area, and regularization has basically been majorly on Milo, because there are ongoing projects to ensure that there is regularization of land rights. Some other regularization has been in terms of land use management, and that was prioritized as one of our key areas. Legal and regulatory reforms, which the previous speaker pointed out, we also prioritized those because we saw that you cannot implement new policy reforms without touching the legal and policy framework. A lot of work has already been done. I will not dwell into that, but it was a prioritized area. Research and studies to support the land program reform. You are aware that when the National Land Policy was inaugurated in 2013, there were some areas, especially under the constitutional reforms, which required some further research. We have done a lot of research, and these ones, we shall go through them quickly. Land rights, civic education and awareness program. We have done a lot of seminars, and this area has also been participated in by a number of civil society organizations. They picked interest and they disseminated. They helped us reach the grassroots. A lot of civic awareness has been done at all levels. Then fulfilling regional and international obligations. Uganda is a signatory to many, many international and regional conventions. And when you look at our national land policy framework 11, it will give you a key highlight. What is it that we are supposed to do in terms of the East African community, at African Union level, and globally? What do we speak? For example, what is the African Forum on Women's Land Rights? You find that under international obligations. Land use and land management reforms were also highlighted. Here we are basically talking about the reviewing of the Physical Planning Act and other related reforms. So what have we done? What have we accomplished? Looking at 20 years down the road, you reflect through that period. It had its own recess, but 2013 we picked it up from where we had stopped with the 1995 Constitution, and that is how we managed to implement the new National Land Policy. The Secretariat coordinates the reforms. I head that Secretariat. We have established a multi-sectoral, multidisciplinary committee. This one oversees the implementation of all these programs. We have various working groups, and we managed for the first time to facilitate the establishment of a donor working group on land. This one was a very, very you know, key success. And currently we have FAO as chair, and the co-chair is the World Bank. So some of you have already met these people. They meet on a monthly basis, and they work with government and civil society and the academia. We also were able to undertake a stakeholder mapping exercise for all our land actors to determine their geographical location, their mandates, interests, and these ones helped us a lot because we were able, through a series of meetings, to define roles of each actor and also to create what we have called the stakeholder matrix. And that stakeholder matrix has now been electronically linked, and it's on our website in the Ministry of Lands, and we are going to benefit from its use through what you call updates. So if any actor has any article, if they have any information, we shall be requiring them to link into our website. It's called the National Land Policy website, but it's linked to the Ministry of Lands, Housing and Urban Development website, and it is specific to all actors involved in implementing the National Land Policy. So we have got that link which has been created. We also, through the FIRST initiatives, developed the National Gender Strategy on Land, but specific to implementing the National Land Policy. And this gender strategy is helping us to mainstream gender throughout our activities in the land sector. We developed the M&E framework for the National Land Policy, and this one is helping us to monitor progress. So those were activities which we highlighted as key startup areas, and we benefited from funding from our development partners, and majorly on the list has been GLTN. Specific funding for the National Land Policy came through GLTN. GLTN is the Global Land Tool Network of UN Habitat. So we have benefited, like I said, a lot from our partners. Lands could not do much without the support of our development partners. So when they founded the Development Partners Working Group, they now meet regularly, and like I have pointed out, they have different niches. Like UN Habitat have said, they are helping us in National Land Policy. They secure women's land rights through issuance of CCOs, and they are doing a lot also in the urban sector. The World Bank gives support to infrastructure development, computerization of the land registry, systematic demarcation, registration of communal land, and legal review, and a few other items under IEC. FAO has continued to give us support on customary land certification and registration. So those are our partners doing different things. We have GIZ on board. They have a program essentially on mapping tenants on Milo to resolve the Milo impasse between landlords and tenants. And they are currently working in Mitiana, Mubende, and I think Kasanda. But they also have a component which supports CCOs in the Teso region. Ford Foundation is another partner. It has supported the National Land Policy Secretariat, not through only funding, but they also give us a lot of technical support and capacity building. They have exposed the Secretariat to international fora, and they have helped us in reviewing the National Implementation Action Plan. So we shall be launching the IAP2, which will be 2 years to fit into the programs of NDP2, and thereafter we shall develop IAP3, which shall be 5 years. EU support went into capacity needs assessment. FES, we have FES. The full name is complicated, but these are our very beautiful partners. They keep printing for us and reprinting these books. They are pretty expensive, but when you talk to them, they will supply the books. They have also helped us to hold breakfast meetings on topical issues. And these ones help us to get on to where we want to go. We get a lot of feedback. USAID SAFE supported capacity building programs through training and provision of material support to land management institutions in 26 districts. These assistance went to district land boards and district land offices. And this was very, very helpful. Now, we have done a lot of building strong partnerships amongst our local actors. I have highlighted here a few. If you don't see yourself, don't think we are not working with you. But we have a criteria, and when we work with you, we prefer that you enter into a memorandum of understanding with us. So it goes further than you calling us or writing a formal letter and saying, I want you to be part of this activity. If you are our partner and we have an MOU with you, we have clear obligations, clear roles to fulfill. And these are some of the organizations where we have MOUs. And they are doing a lot of work. You can see Pelham. They do a lot of sharing research, publication, stakeholder engagements. Ukoback is another partner, strengthening women's land rights. Accord, advocacy research. LandNet, they also are our partners. Mercy Corps came recently on board, but they are working a lot in Karamoja region, and they are helping us with stakeholder engagements and also issuing of certificates of customary ownership. We have other partners in Kabale IIRR, and they are doing research plus advocacy and also engaged in issuance of certificates of customary ownership. A number of other organizations have already applied, although their MOUs have not been finalized, but we have a multi-stakeholder and very vibrant CSO group. And they have done a lot of sensitization, and they have reached grassroots where we could not get before. So national and policy works through partners, and we feel that the matrix helps us to identify who are our key stakeholders and what capacities do they have. Where we find that you are very good at lobbying and advocacy, you will work in that area. Where we feel you are an academician, then we have you on board on research. And so we have done a lot of work together with all our partners, and these activities are various in different parts of the country, and a lot of credit goes not only to the Secretariat because we are seen on the ground, but with all our partners, we have been able to get where we are. So I wanted us to run through when you look at, for example, the CCOs, they will give you this paper. We are doing a lot of work on certificates of customary ownership. We are in Mutiana, rather we are in Teso, we are in Kabale, we are in Padel. The other day the minister launched 300 certificates in Pade. We are in Ajumani. We are in very many places. And this work is going to continue. So I call upon other CSOs with similar programs to approach us, and we work together, and we are able to achieve. When you look at systematic demarcation, we are also doing a lot of activities around the whole country, but I cannot go through all these details. I want us to share what our challenges have been and success factors. When you look at why we have achieved, it is through a number of initiatives. One, it was building a strong secretariat to coordinate these reforms. The secretariat is strong. It may look thin, but it's very strong because we have been able to achieve a number of activities. And then building this vibrant CSO regime has also helped us. We call it building a strong, vibrant, which can work with everybody. Where I'm not, I always get a letter saying we have been working in this district, or we intend to work in this district. Can you give us either the materials or can you give us the information? And they have been able to deliver for us. So that has been one of our strong areas. Then support from development partners, because most of the budget for the land sector is still greatly funded by development partners. And so they've done a succeed. Then defining roles and responsibilities amongst actors. Before, this would cause us a lot of problems, but now we know that organization X is working in this area. This has saved us not only saving us resources, because you cannot duplicate. We shall tell you, you want to train land boards in Hoima, organization X and Y are also doing the same. Why can't you maybe move to another area? And this has helped us to save us from wastage of resources and also community fatigue. Because in the past, you'd find that 3 organizations are running workshops, and the communities get fatigued. Now we have a very organized way of doing things, and everybody will write to the Secretariat, National Land Policy Secretariat. We intend to carry out this activity. Please give us the facilitators or come and be present. And so we are moving in a very well coordinated way. Then the good political support, of course. If we didn't have the goodwill of our ministers and HE the president, we wouldn't have achieved much. But we have a lot of good political support at all levels, from cabinet to national MPs, then to the ground, and with all our partners. And then we have also been able to build on the infrastructure. This is the World Bank infrastructure, which has laid and rehabilitated land offices throughout the country in 2021 zones. So that infrastructure is one of our success factors, because already we have staff in those zones, and we have the computers, and we have everything working. So we just build on that. Nevertheless, we have had some challenges, and the challenges are highlighted. You can see we have some staff fatigue, because there have been a lot of restructuring in the ministry, and we are maintaining a skeleton staff. And we have a challenge of building champions, because sometimes you work with volunteers and you build their capacity, but because government has not fully employed them, they leave. So you need to build again new champions. So that is challenging. Then prioritizing, because funding is so limited, we need to prioritize, and it's always a challenge because each donor has their own priority. So you need to do a lot of lobbying and negotiation to convince them that I think you should do this and this in this area, or you should give us funding for this. So it takes a lot of time to lobby for funds. Harmonization of sectoral laws and policies is a big thorn in our flesh, and like Sawa has said, review of laws under all policies globally is a very big challenge. And yet, if you don't harmonize, if you don't review your laws, the policy will be speaking something different, and the legal framework is also speaking something different. So we have a thorn there, and we hope we can be able to catch up and move very fast. Then the other area is providing a conducive environment for non-state actors. Sometimes non-state actors have also their own mandates, and sometimes bringing them in harmony takes a bit of time and negotiation. I think those are the challenges, but all the way, 20 years, when you reflect from 2013, for us we are saying we have done a lot of work, and we are in the process of finalizing Implementation Action Plan 2, and once we finalize that plan, it will guide us into our next priorities for the next 2 years. I think with those few remarks, we had some lessons to learn. Lessons to learn include promoting continuous stakeholder participation and buy-in. You know, when the land policy had only been inaugurated 1 year, 2 years, everybody is very active. Now you need to rejuvenate the fire always, to say, hey, 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 we are still here, and you need to engage, continuous engagement of stakeholders, and also to create champions, because each organization is good at something. You need to recognize that strength and work on that. Then reminding key actors. You need to write to them emails, reminding them of their commitments. It's always very important. Good political support and environment. That one you need to learn to work with the politicians, because they are the ones who head this organization. Then donor support and rallying behind the reforms. Here I have spoken to the group several times, and I have to keep going back. They will ask you questions, but eventually when they are on board, they'll help you facilitate the process. Looking out for quick wins. You know, you need to know where are your strengths, build on those. Don't start with very complicated things, like legal review is complicated. Look out for sensitization, look out for CCOs, look out for things which you can actually say, these are my quick wins. Then building smaller committees of a team of experts with a vision. Under the National Land Policy Secretariat, we are supported by a team of experts. These are experts, but very committed people. And sometimes when we do work, we work outside the ordinary hours. So you need to get there, and that is the time they've given you, but they do a lot of thinking. And I always call them team of experts and the think tank of national land policy. Then realization that different actors have different interests. That helps you a lot. You cannot dig where you find there is a rock, and yet you'd have gone elsewhere where there are softer soils. So learn to realize that different interests lie with different people. Then you build on the strengths of your actors. Now, when I walk to GIZ, I know where their niche is. So I'll talk about that. When I go to EU, I know where their niche is. I'll talk about that. When I go to FAO, I know what they want, and I'll talk about that. When I'm in Wukobak, I know what they want. When I'm in Landinet, I know what they want. So I have learned to build on strengths of all my actors to be able to implement Uganda's national land policy. So there I define the roles of each partner for land sector professionals, development partners, and CSOs. But all to say that we have been able to walk the talk. We've done a lot of things. We now are into a phase of producing our second report, and it will show what we have done, what we have been able to achieve. So I want to thank so much GLTN, because without them, they are the people we run to. Without them, we wouldn't do much. Thank you so much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Ms. Naomi Kabanda. Sometimes you live in this country and you don't know just how much is happening until you come to forums like this. So thank you very much for highlighting the journey, the tremendous journey that the last 5 years have been. We are running very badly behind time, but we would like now to welcome, please join me in welcoming Ms. Gracia Akwi to speak to us about civil society engagements over the last 20 years. Again, I have to put her in the unreasonable position of summarizing 20 years in a few minutes. But if you will join us. Hey, that's right.
Is it afternoon or still morning? Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, honorable delegates. I'm happy to meet you and to reconnect with friends and fellow colleagues in the struggle. I've noticed as I sat there that you're tired. I just want you to get up a little bit and just stretch. Please. Just stretch. Move around. Are you all right now? Do you feel like you're stretched? Okay. Been advised that I don't have much time. I was asked to talk about the growth of civil society engagement over land in the last 20 years. And I'll try to do that. This paper will explore the various roles and ways civil society organizations have been undertaking while engaging on land in Uganda for the last 20 years. But what I'll not do is go into the details of what civil society has done, but just to briefly share with you what informs the work of civil society in the land sector, the kind of things that we've done, the achievements we've had, some challenges, and some recommendations. Civil society organizations have been taking place at local, national, and international levels. CSO's engagement on land in Uganda, Africa, and worldwide has various approaches and priorities, ranging from rights-based approaches to secure land rights for the poor and marginalized in society, promoting pro-poor land governance, securing agrarian reforms, protecting and promoting the land rights of indigenous people, hunter-gatherers, pastoralists, fishing communities, through law and policy reforms, among others. So what has informed the work of civil society organizations? Most of the civil society's work is based on internationally, regionally, and nationally agreed upon conventions, protocols, declarations, plans of action, strategies, laws, and policies, and what Naomi just described here as the national, such as the national land policy. Globally and regionally and nationally, locally agreed frameworks, for example, Agenda 2030, the voluntary guidelines on the responsible governance of tenure of lands, forests, and fisheries, VGGT in short, the Uganda Vision 2040, among others. Also, we have among the stakeholders in this room, the National Engagement Strategy, which was actually launched this morning. Unfortunately, I missed to be at the launch, which was initiated and promoted by the International Land Coalition and the Global Land Forum, of which Uganda Land Alliance is proud to be associated and to be a member. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the 1948 declaration, which defines human rights as universal, inherent, indivisible, inalienable, non-discriminatory, inclusive, transparent, accountable, and so on. So these are the kind of things that guide the work of civil society organizations in our engagement with our government and with the Ministry of Land and Land. Human rights are universal and inalienable and indivisible, interdependent and interrelated, and they are universal. They apply to everybody born with and possesses the same rights regardless of where they live, their gender or race, or their religious, cultural, or ethnic background. Therefore, for civil society organizations to locate land within the human rights framework has been very, very important, and a lot of Uganda Land Alliance members, and we're a consortium of about 60 members, is really largely informed by and we locate our work in the human rights framework. We also have the UN Declaration on Human Rights, Article 1 and Article 2. I will not go into that. But I think one of the speakers mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. We have SDG 15, which was agreed upon by a group of 193 countries in 2015. So that also informs the kind of work that we do around in the land sector as civil society organizations. We have our Uganda Vision 2040, and since we are all, most of us here are Ugandans, I won't go into that. That also informs the kind of work we do. So I wanted to just share for those of you who are new to Uganda Land Alliance that we were founded in 1995 at the time of the 1995 constitutional making. Uganda Land Alliance, we like to call ourselves ULA, was the first civil society consortium of organizations and individuals focusing specifically on land-related matters aimed at benefiting Uganda's vulnerable populations. The Constitution of 1995 mandated Parliament of Uganda to enact a law within 2 years of sitting to regulate the relationships between the lawful and bona fide occupants of Milo land, freehold and leasehold land, and registered owners of that land to provide for the acquisition of registrable interests in land by the occupant. I'm talking about this because at that time, many of the civil society organizations were working on various areas and themes, and they met in somehow they realized that in their interaction with the stakeholders they were working with, land was somehow always an issue. Remember, this is the period immediately after several wars, and also this is a period after we were impacted by the HIV/AIDS. So this is a period Uganda experienced a new group of people called child-headed households. or female-headed households. And the issue usually when, even if you are working on HIV/AIDS, you will eventually find that as you work around HIV/AIDS with women or with children or orphans of people who have died of HIV/AIDS, somehow land will always feature. So this is a time that Uganda Land Alliance was born and spearheaded and championed specifically and focused specifically on land. So under the euphoria of the 95 Constitution, particularly Article 26 and Chapter 15 on land and environment, including Article 237, 241, and so on, there was at that time no single SCO, civil society organization equipped to galvanize, advocate, and lobby for a land law and policy in a manner that would meet the aspirations of the various stakeholders. Hence the establishment of Uganda Land Alliance. That was through really the sponsorship and guidance, and we must give credit where it's due to people like Judy Adoko. For those of you who know her, she's now the executive director of LEMU. At that time, she was working in Oxfam, but I have to also credit the stewardship of people like Deborah Sia, who was the first ED, seconded to Uganda Land Alliance from Oxfam, and Esther Baikol, who is here today, who grew the organization and really grew it in programmatically, financially, and staffing to actually advocate for both the Land Act 1998 and the Land Policy 2015, among others. The anticipated land and policy was wanting as they are, we wouldn't be celebrating them if we hadn't had the perseverance and hard work of civil society organizations and individuals within those organizations. So I would like to commend all of us here for having supported our ministry in the enactment of those laws. Yes, we did lobby, we did. We did. I won't go into this. Okay. So what is our understanding of and engagement with the civil society organizations? Civil society, in our understanding, is the aggregate of non-government organizations and institutions that manifest interests and will of citizens. Civil society includes the family and the private sphere and is referred to as the third sector of society, distinct from government and business. Many aid actors, particularly among governments in developing countries, refer to non-government organizations, NGOs, and their role in international aid and development cooperation. But the phrase NGO is contested terminology, and for many has been subsumed within a broader category now called civil society organizations or civil society, CSOs. Political parties, social movements, civil society organizations, interest groups, and other social organizations can play an important role in strengthening and deepening democracy. They can serve as a mechanism for political participation and mobilization, disseminating democratic principles and norms. And why am I going on and on about all of that? Because really, when you look at land, for us in the Uganda Land Alliance, land is life. For a country like Uganda, where 80% of the population derives livelihood from land and is engaged in land, 75% of that population actually living in the rural areas and are illiterate. Basically, land is the only resource that they know how to use and how to utilize for their livelihoods. So the role of civil society organizations is to understand policy direction. Uganda Land Alliance and their members undertake participatory researches that offer evidence-based foundation for law and policy reform. Civil society in Uganda have played a critical role in promoting pro-poor and people-centered land governance. They support and promote synergies between the state and communities on land reforms by fostering establishment of horizontal and vertical linkages that enable information sharing as well as a wider consultations with communities. Examples abound in Uganda and elsewhere where civil society organizations play a critical role as watchdogs and promoters of good land governance practice. Professor, when you are talking about all those laws that you are formulating, the new ones and the old ones that you are reviewing, I sat keenly listening for whether you'll mention whether among those things that are in the pipeline would be a law that will give guidance about compensation and evictions. Because our experience in Uganda Land Alliance is that there is sometimes a conflicting interest between government agencies. We have Uganda Wildlife Authority, National Forest Authority, and we have the Ministry of Land. Now, when you have individuals in the fray, in the middle of that, are you going to come up with some guidelines about evictions? Case in point, APA, if you remember. And that is the one that we were able to actually give some audience and some space in the media. But there are so many other Ugandans who are similarly situated because of the competing interests that abound around land. So I was hoping that there would be some guidelines that will come out of government on evictions and also compensation and relocation of people who are evicted. So what have civil society been doing over the last 20 years? One, they've been empowering communities through civil and legal education, as Naomi also noted. And those are examples there. They've been doing advocacy and lobbying. They have also been promoting access to justice and working with people who do not know how to secure their rights, to show them how best to secure their rights over land. They have been offering capacity building and technical support. For example, the Uganda Land Alliance has trained several paralegals in different parts of the country. So have other civil society organizations. And those paralegals do provide, to the best extent they can, some legal support for the indigent and those who cannot afford legal lawyers in those communities. We have also, as civil society, been organizing collective action. For example, civil society have been mobilizing communities for policy, legal processes, and implementation and advocacy campaigns. So we'd like to work with the ministry in getting the land rights, in securing the land rights of people, but we're also watching. And if we come campaigning on your doorsteps, don't chase us away, because we have, I think, the same aim. We all want the best the best security of tenure for all Ugandans. We have also been, as civil society, very busy in research, monitoring, and evaluation. but we have faced some challenges. Sometimes direct dialogue between government institutions and civil society on sensitive land governance issues is impossible to achieve. This is especially when the civil society agenda appears to go against the government position. A case in point is the recent proposed amendment to Article 26. So this risks creating an impasse between government and CSOs and puts them in a confrontational line. That's one of the challenges we've faced. Secondly, most civil society organizations rely heavily on donor funding, which comes with conditions and terms and governed by sometimes donor interests, as you have also realized. Sometimes the land governance issue is highly volatile, and the donor may be reluctant to fund an advocacy campaign, since they do not want to appear to clash with the government of Uganda. In other scenarios, civil society organizations end up implementing donor interests instead of needs of communities, and this weakens their ability to effectively represent the poor. These donor grants run in project cycles, and when they end, civil society organizations are not in place. Core are Ugandans who need the services, especially corruption in the land sector. Civil society sector, given the values such as accountability, transparency, and justice that many NGOs profess, one would be forgiven to think that people who choose to work for NGOs would be driven by same value proportions. But this is not the case in some scenarios, and it has raised credibility concerns in the sector. And I think for those of us in civil society, this is to us a challenge. Fourthly, there is a delay and failure to implement international instruments and standards by the state. This has also affected our workers in civil society who are engaging on land, since this gives civil society lack of benchmarks on which to judge policy performance and national situations. Implementation of these instruments and treaties can act as a basis for legal challenges to anti-poor policies or failure to implement policies. I was asking, for example, in the extractive industry, has Uganda signed up to the standards in the extractive industry? So if it has not signed up to the standards in the extractive industry, how do we, actors in civil society, help our colleagues who in Karamoja and Mhoima with the oil and gas, such people affected by the extractive industry? If there are no standards, how do we benchmark? Number 5, the infringements of fundamental rights and civil liberties have affected civil society engagement on land governance issues. For advocacy to be effective, there has to be access to information, and yet sometimes the state restricts CSOs from accessing this information, especially on agreements with investors, mining treaties, and such kind of information that would enable us to see how best to support our stakeholders and communities that we work with. There have also been difficulties in identifying potential allies for constructive engagements. This is true for both for governments and CSOs, whereby allies may fail to identify each other, and even if they do, they may not want to be seen to initiate contact. So this makes it very difficult. So I was very pleased to hear your presentation, Naomi, about how you have done it. So maybe this was before I heard what you had to tell us about how you've done it, the matrix that you've come up with. That will be very helpful to all of us. Recommendations. It's essential that the sector leadership champion a zero tolerance to corruption, decisively deal with cases when they emerge, and create avenues through which internal and external stakeholders can report cases of corruption and integrity deficits. NGOs may need to create a more robust internal audit function that regularly examines internal controls and financial hygiene of the organization. This function will examine not just financials, but also values and systems issues, and act as a foundation for control. I'm speaking from experience of Uganda Land Alliance here. And I know there are many more organizations in this forum and in this room that also need to self-critically, self-analyze and issues in terms of values and systems, in addition to the financials. I also recommend that we build an enabling environment for civil society by promoting protection of fundamental human rights and civil liberties. The state should put in place legislation that enables civil society to operate, and this will enable civil society to flourish. Professor, you are the one who is coming up with new legislation. We hope that you can find a way in for those of us in the land sector. We are likely to clash if we are working with people and helping people who have been affected, for example, in the extractive industry. And also, we haven't even talked about the pastoralists. So we need some protection to be able to do our work well. Thirdly, we recommend there should be need to create space for continuous dialogue and engagement between the state and civil society. There is need to foster constructive relations between government and civil society. And I think Naomi has already provided that forum, so I had please ignore, but this was in my presentation, because at the time I made the presentation, I felt the need. Lastly, there is need to build civil society capacity for dialogue and promote inclusivity. I thank you for your kind attention.
Let's just appreciate our presenter one more time for giving us 20 years, a summary of 20 years in those minutes. Now, I noticed that we have overrun our time, but I'm going to request that you bear with us and we take the last presenter on grassroots participation, and then after that we'll advise on what's going to happen next. Please join me in welcoming Ms. Rebecca Apio to speak to us about grassroots efforts in implementing land reforms and what the trajectory looks like today in the next few minutes, and then we'll see how best to redeem our time and maximize the moments that we have left.
Good afternoon, everyone. Once again, I am called Rebecca Apio, and I work for Trokra as policy manager. My task this afternoon is simple, is to talk about grassroots effort in implementation of land reforms. And I do not have a PowerPoint presentation. I'll just run through a few of the bullet points that I have here. Implementation of the land reforms dates back to 1995, when the Constitution was promulgated, and thereafter we saw a number of laws and policies coming into play. The 1998 Land Act, that is the subject of our discussion today. It's now at 20 years. And we also saw the National Land Policy coming in 2013 and in 2013. And besides the Land Act and the National Land Policy, there were several other laws coming in and amendments. Professor has been talking about the RTA, the Survey Act. All these, when we look at the National Land Policy, requires amendment. So the reforms does not stop now. It looks like we still have a long way to go into achieving the goal that is desired by the Land Act. So my discussion is going to be tailored specifically on our theme, that is the Land Act at 20 years. Just a brief background. The principles that guided the formulation of the Land Act, briefly, one was that it should be in uniform. It should be uniform throughout the country. And then secondly, that existing laws, existing land rights should be protected. And when we look at the Land Act, Section 2, it reaffirms the constitutional provisions of the 4 10-year systems. This is very critical for us in as far as the Land Act, promulgation of the Land Act is concerned. Reaffirming the constitutional provision was a plus. So I'll go direct into efforts by grassroots communities in implementation of the Land Act. First and foremost, we'll look at customary dispute settlement and mediation. This was mentioned by Naomi. I'm glad that most of what I have to present was in one way or the other mentioned by the previous presenters. The issue of dispute resolution is provided for under the Land Act, Section 88. And I always encourage people to read through to better understand or to better appreciate what the laws and policies say. At grassroots level, we have traditional institutions handling land disputes in the spirit of the Land Act. These traditional institutions have been trained and tools provided to them thanks to civil society organizations who are on ground, who are supporting the Ministry of Lands in ensuring that the Land Act is implemented and ensuring that the traditional institutions are well equipped with the knowledge, not only on the land laws and policies, but also on ADR mechanisms, that is alternative dispute resolution. A great job has been done on this, and the traditional institutions are effectively handling land dispute resolution. Besides the traditional institutions, we have the paralegals. The executive director of Uganda Land Alliance has mentioned how in the past they were engaged in building capacity or training of these paralegals. They're on ground. Several other civil society organizations have been engaged in training, capacity building of these paralegals so that they are able to effectively handle sensitization sessions as well as alternative dispute resolution, that is mainly mediation of land disputes. All this in the spirit of implementation of the Land Act. I'd also like to mention about the judicature mediation rules, which provides that a dispute should be handled through mediation before it is had or before litigation. This, in one way or the other, has also enhanced the implementation of the Land Act, because all disputes, all land disputes are referred to mediations. That means the traditional institutions are involved. Yes, we have trained mediators, and these trained mediators, some of them are actually the paralegals who are on ground, who has the qualifications of being mediators. So this has also gone a long way into, linking up the traditional institutions, the formal and informal institutions in the implementation of the Land Act. Because having a court that is a formal institution referring back these cases to the informal creates a link between the formal and informal land justice systems. And it has actually gone beyond mediation, because we see decisions of traditional institutions. Once there is an agreement between the two parties, this agreement is entered as a consent judgment by court. And this is a plus for the traditional institution or for the informal system. So we take this as a very great effort by the grassroots institutions in implementing the land reforms. And then we also have community sensitizations. Traditional institutions and the paralegals we have mentioned have played a really great role when it comes to sensitization, all thanks to civil society organizations, most of whom are actually here. They've really played a great role in building capacity of these grassroots structures so that they're able to sensitize communities on the land laws and policies, and in one way or the other, ensuring that they are aware of the content in the laws and policies. The professor mentioned about 13 laws to be revised. We know of 16. One time we were going through one by one, and I think there were a total of 16, but I'm yet to be corrected. These are quite many for these grassroots institutions, and they are technical. Professor was even talking about the RTA, which is even technical to Professor himself. So what would happen to a grassroots person at that level? So it's very important that we simplify this document so that the traditional institutions, I mean the grassroots institution, can be able to properly understand this. Another effort we see at grassroots level in implementation of the national land policy is registration and documentation of land. This is really key in the implementation of the Land Act process. And Naomi talked about it and even mentioned some of the areas where registration and documentation of land is being carried out. For example, we see certificate of customary ownership now being embraced by communities at grassroots. We have these initiatives going on in various districts, especially in northern and eastern Uganda, as well as in Kasese, several. Otherwise, this would not be possible. And this effort still, we applaud the civil society organizations as well as the Ministry of Lands for sensitizing the communities, ensuring that they understand what kind of registration they are going for. Otherwise, it wouldn't have been a success. When it comes to documentation of land, we also look at the communal land associations. This is mainly in the Karamoja region. Communities in that area have also embraced registration of land through the CLAs. And then there are other fit-for-purpose technologies that are in place. For example, we have the social tenure domain model developed by Global Land Tool Network. This has also been used in various parts of the country. It focuses on land and property, bringing on board the continuum of land rights. This has also helped in registration of land using the fit-for-purpose. We know that the fit-for-purpose technology is user-friendly, is cost-effective, and the communities have embraced it, and the initiative is ongoing. And then most recently we have the CRISP. It's a kind of documentation process by GIZ. It is cadastral rights inventory saving paper. It's also a kind of documentation and registration process. This is mainly being used on minor land in Mubende and Mitiana. And I'll urge those who really want to know more about the fit-for-purpose tools. There's a whole session on it, but the grassroots community have been able to brace this, and the process of documentation of land using CRISPs is ongoing in Mubende and Mityana, to my knowledge. Not to say that this has gone be without challenges. One more effort when it comes to documentation of land rights is the boundary tree planting. This initiative is mainly fronted by LEMO, Land and Equity Movement in Uganda, and community members have really embraced the boundary tree planting. They've gone beyond boundary tree planting. We now have them also having the sketch map drawing. I was amazed in Katakwi district in Teso region that the sketch maps are now being registered in the sub-county office, in the office of the recorder. So this is encouraging. It tends towards, formal documentation of land rights. I kept imagining within myself that, yes, the communities have now moved to simply boundary tree planting. They are now onto the sketch map drawing and have gone to filing these sketch maps in the formal land office. So there's need for the Ministry of Lands and several CSOs who are on ground to support this grassroots initiative, so that there's a formal kind of documentation, a formal registration for these maps. We know that the NLP implementation is still ongoing. Madam Naomi has talked about the reforms, which may take quite some time, but we hope it will be forthcoming, so that there's a registry in place. There's need for a registry in place to register such documents, so that they do not stop at filing them at the registry for safe custody alone, but they should be in place as a formal registry. Not to say that this has gone without challenges. In the implementation of this, the Land Act, grassroots community have suffered a number of challenges. Sometimes it's terrible to talk last. Okay, 2 minutes left. I'll speak offhand. They have registered a number of challenges. The first being that the laws and policies already mentioned by Professor are really technical for the grassroots communities. They're not able to properly appreciate this. I'll go into the recommendations as well. There's need for us to translate these laws and policies, especially the Land Act, into the local languages, and then go into simplifying them so that the communities are able to properly appreciate what are in these documents. And then also dissemination of this. Who are the final beneficiaries of these documents? We also have to ensure that the documents reach the grassroots communities. When it comes to documentation of land, yes, we have the fit-for-purpose technology, but the problem is there are still costs involved. If the CSOs don't come on ground, if the development partners are not funding, what happens? It becomes a challenge. Development partners and CSOs are located in only specific communities. And then when you go to other communities where there are no initiatives, communities are willing, they really want to register their land, but they do not have the funding. So we also need to look into this. Another challenge that the grassroots communities are facing in terms of mediation or say land justice institution is that there's a lot of forum shopping. The grassroots community, that is the traditional institutions, are only able to handle the informal bit of the mediation. And then there are several other mushrooming agencies handling land disputes as well. So the communities have gotten confused sometimes in the process, you know, running from one institution to another, running from one agency to another. So there's need to align this so that the dispute resolution agencies are streamlined. Still again, in harmonizing the formal and informal institution, there's need for a clear hierarchy of dispute resolution. Because I have mentioned about the judicature mediation rules where there's an agreement between parties, it is registered in court as a consent judgment and a final process. But where there is a disagreement, still national land policy in place, safe for its implementation, which we all have to join hands, so that we see to it that there is a clear hierarchy of what happens next after a case is either held successfully or unsuccessfully by a traditional institution. Another challenge that we have is the District Land Tribunal. It's in black and white in the Land Act. Something has to be done about this. We have the District Land Tribunal, then we have the National Land Policy, again talking about the traditional institution. Still, we see that it's going to cause a lot of confusion for the grassroots communities. And therefore, efforts have to be made in the legal reforms, in looking at those 13 laws and policies when amending, to ensure that there's a clear hierarchy of the land justice institution. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm speaking off-head, and this is all that I have on the efforts by the grassroots communities in implementing the Land Act at 20 years. Thank you so much.
I think it is only fair that we give Rebecca another round of applause. And I do agree with her that there are certain specific challenges that come with speaking after three other presenters, but I think she held the audience quite well. Thank you very, very much, Rebecca. I want to very specially thank every one of our panelists, Mr. Sawa, Ms. Kabanda, Aljedra, and Rebecca, for taking the time. It takes a lot of time, effort to prepare and to be able to articulate the issues they're articulating, covering such a span and sharing your expertise. And I'm sure that we will all agree it was well worth the time and the wait. Now, I know it is my belief that the papers will be circulated, but I also have been looking at the program, and I believe that there are specific sessions that will go into every single one of the topics in detail. Therefore, it is my proposal that rather than attempt to do a rushed Q&A session, we defer the questions either to those sessions, or if you have a really burning question, that you approach any one of our panelists specifically to deal with those questions, and I'm sure they would not have a problem sharing their contacts. Ms. Naomi Kabanda was inviting us to approach her specifically. So this is my proposal, that we do it that way so that we can redeem the time, and therefore we'll be able to proceed to our next event. With that, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being a wonderful audience, and I will return it to the organizers.
Thank you very much, Robert, for steering this session, and to all the participants for being here and listening and paying attention to what has been going on here. You will recall that some time back when President Kenyatta had to appear before the ICC, he signed an instrument vesting power to his deputy president, William Ruto, and for the few days that he was in the ICC, and that just happened here at the National Land Forum. So our MC, Dana, had to step out to do something, so she threw in some bit of power to me to just moderate the next 5 or 10 sessions here, so I'll just be making a couple of announcements. Number one is that we are present online. For those of you who are active on social media, just go on Facebook. Our page is the National Land Forum. On Twitter, or some of you went to good school say Twitter. It's Land for our Twitter handle is Land Forum. 18. And on Instagram, also it's LandForum 18, but our overall hashtag is UG LandForum 18. So when you type in that hashtag, you'll get all the discussions that are here. Our second announcement is that lunch will be at the Kibu restaurant. When you get out of here, you will get ushers to direct you. I'm sure all of you have received the coupons. If you haven't, please get in touch with one of the volunteers from LandNet to give you a coupon. I'm going to make the third announcement, which is on the next sessions. Remember, we have the breakaway sessions in the afternoon. Kind of take note, there have been slight changes. So when you just look at your program, we're going to have a bit of modifications for the afternoon session. So we have the session on 20 years of tenure reform in Uganda. Our focusing on customary tenure, that will remain at Rizzi Hall. We all agree? Is that what's on your program? Rizzi Hall. That hasn't changed. Now, the session on strategies to resolve, and that session is chaired by Rebecca. Rebecca, stand up. Just wave. So if you fail to remember the room, I'll just look for Rebecca. The next session on strategies to resolve Milo land impasse, tenant-landlord relations on Milo, is going to be chaired by Brian Chibirango. Brian, are you here? You could just put up your hand. Okay. Oh, Brian. No, sorry. It's Professor Moses Musinguzi. Professor, is he around? Probably could have stepped out, but we'll figure that out. And then the third session is on trends in property rights in light of constitutional reforms on leases. Originally, it was at Sezibwa Hall. That's going to be at Kafu Hall, which is around the swimming pool area. So if you're interested in attending that session on trends in property rights in light of constitutional reforms on leases, please go to Kafu Hall. And it's going to be chaired by Mr. Augustine Biragora. Mr. Augustine, are you around? He's there. So if you fail to, again, locate the room, at least look for the chair. And lastly, ladies and gentlemen, the other session stays at Nile Hall, which is right here. Now, that session is chaired by Dr. Abi Sebinaziwa. Dr. Abi Sebinaziwa, could you kindly stand up for recognition? Is everybody seeing Dr. Abi? Now, if you have your programs, Doctor, I'm going to request you to remain standing just a little bit. If you have your program, turn with me on page 41. So on page 41 on the bottom right, yeah, I think it's right, has the profile of Dr. Abi Sebinaziwa. But there are two things that are missing on that, in the bio that has been provided there. One is that Dr. Sebina is one of the founders of Uganda Land Alliance. I was actually informed that the first office of ULA was hosted at the Makerere Institute of Social Research, where she was working. So she's like the first ED, if we are to say, of Uganda Land Alliance. Now, the second thing that's missing in that program, and this is really special, and that's why I'm going to ask her to remain standing, is that the National Land Forum is happening today, the inaugural Land Forum. And today is the first day, it's 12th. So 12th of November also happens to be Dr. Sebina's birthday. So we felt that it's only befitting, as land actors, we pay tribute to her by singing for her happy birthday. Unfortunately, I'm not gifted with the voice, so I requested Stella from LandNet. Stella, where are you? To lead us in singing the happy birthday to Dr. Sabina. And there's no cake, so as you're having lunch, in case there's dessert, you can assume that it's her birthday cake. So Stella, please come and sing happy birthday to Doctor. We can all join in as we go for lunch. Thank you so much.
Just in honor of Dr.